So today's topic is scaling to win, how to successfully scale Angular for enterprises. And this is our agenda for today. So let me quickly go over it. We'll start with giving you folks a quick introduction of Angular. And we'll quickly touch on the challenges of scaling. And then right after, we'll be jumping into why Angular meets the needs of enterprises. Following this, my apologies. Cool. Sorry for that. It was just resolving some issues. Okay, now it's good. So as I mentioned just now, then right after we'll jump into why Angular meets the needs of enterprises. Following, we'll introduce Angular Elements, which from recent experiences, it has been working great. And it was a great success for us when we helped our enterprise client scale their application. Right after Angular Elements, we'll be sharing some of the benefits of reusability. Lastly, I'll summarize the webinar and set some time aside for some Q&A. So don't worry about the Q&A section for now. And of course, if any of you have additional questions following this webinar, please do not hesitate to send your email or questions to marketing@Rangle.io, and we'll make sure to get in touch with you and answer all your questions. Without further ado, allow me to introduce myself. I am Freddie, your presenter for today's webinar. A little bit about myself. I'm currently a software developer working at Rangle. I started as a co-op/intern, and I have just hit my 3 years mark at the beginning of this month. Over these 3 years, I have been working solely in Angular, and I had an amazing opportunity to kind of dig into the need and greed of the framework, which is amazing. I love anything UI related, and I also have a strong passion towards animations. Whether it's 3D, 2D, with CSS or a framework, I can talk about it all day long. I would also love to introduce Rangle. Who are we and what do we do, you may be asking? And for the broader audience, Rangle is a digital consultancy that, in 8 years, has grown from a modern JavaScript development shop to a customer experience-focused team of product consultants. Not only Angular is our original framework of choice, but we are a leading Google collaborator for Angular projects, including the new Angular DevTools, which you should definitely check out after this webinar. For those curious, it's an excellent tool that will help you debug and profile your Angular application. It's super easy to use, and I'm really digging it. Oops, my apologies, the slide's not changing, so I will have to click here. Okay, cool. So Angular introduction. While many of us know what Angular is, hence the topic of this webinar, I wanted to give a brief introduction of Angular to a broader audience through a few key points. Angular is an established framework, yes, for developing web-based applications. An official release in September of 2016, I believe, so almost 5 years ago, giving it lots of time to mature and provide us with many great tools to develop with. One thing I love about Angular is that they offer sort of like a long-term support of their versions. But it is recommended to upgrade Angular to get the latest and greatest feature. But it is not detrimental per se if, for instance, you want to keep using an older version. Also, since it's a popular framework, and because of its maturity, there are many great communities and events such as Angular meetups or conferences such as ngConf, which you can attend. And these are good ways to kind of get insights of how others are using Angular. And of course, an excellent opportunity to pick up great new ways to do things with Angular. Second, we have to say that Angular is an opinionated framework. And with that, you get a lot of consistency right out of the box. For context, it helps enforce standards with file structure and logic within your code. As a result, it helps achieve consistency between projects, especially in an enterprise setup where teams are large. And when we hear about the word opinionated, we think about restrictions, constraints, but in reality, these are great opinions to follow, and you'll be able to find many resources and community of devs out there, making learning new patterns or way to use Angular a lot less challenging. And I will elaborate more on how the enterprises can benefit from this in a few slides ahead. Angular has a robust ecosystem, yes, especially with associated libraries that aligns with its opinionated processes. For example, NGRX, the primary use state management system, is built off of RxJS, which is what Angular is also built off of, the event-driven pattern. This consistency of tooling helps orient your team on specific technologies to focus on when onboarding or leveling up, giving you much more bang for the buck. And of course, consistent improvements of the framework. Angular is currently at version 12, which has continued to bring performance up improvements and started to fully utilize their new Ivy engine, which enables for more high quality improvements to the framework in the near future. As an example with Ivy, you can compile components more independently from each other. This improves development time since recompiling an application will only compile those components that change. Additionally, it places its focus on tree shaking, giving you the ability to eliminate any unused code in your final bundle. And as a result, the final code package will be smaller, which will help your app load faster. The challenges of scale. When we think about scale, I personally don't think it should simply mean large. It should be more about impact and value. And that means a code base that can expand and adapt quickly and easily to the number of teams and problems you can throw at it. When it comes to scaling, we've learned that through experience, that focusing on the following three areas in modern enterprise will help you ensure the time and money invested in the digital capabilities kind of starts to pay off. And these are consistency and standards enforcement, code structure, and team organization. And we'll start with the first one, consistency and standards and enforcement. And standards enforcement. Unlike building one application, when an organization has a mature ecosystem, sharing its success amongst these applications can be quite complex. There is a sentence, more like a question, I'll say, I've heard a lot and I still hear nowadays, which probably many of you have heard, which is why reinvent the wheel? And we'll touch more on this in our reusability section shortly, but you can sort of see where I'm going with this. If there's a certain standards in place, and this will share across other products within the same ecosystem, this will surely help keep everything stay consistent. A good example that comes into my mind right now is the usage or adoption of a design system. With a design system, you have these rules on how to consume the components. And these components hold all the necessary work to support your business needs. When put together, it becomes this tight and clean system. And now let's picture all your products being built the same way. That's what consistency would look like, and how enforcing standards will help you achieve such. Code structure, and this is a very common one. We mentioned consistency right now, and to the same point in a mature ecosystem, you have multiple teams working on multiple products at the same time. As different teams might have different set of standards, it is bound to see that certain products' code structure might be different, or might be ultimately very different, to a case where making reusability a number one goal for enterprise technologists. And lastly, team organization. It's very easy to think a single product team practicing Agile will produce great results. However, products team and an enterprise need to be linked one to another. They also need to have access to a cross-functional team in the organization so that they're enabled to remove their own blockers and communicate their goals and need. Team structure and enablement is the most underestimated facet of modern development best practices. It's also the most important one. Let's say you're writing a social media platform and you want a really robust and powerful component to make a post, tag some friends, upload images, add comments, and etc. And this feature is required for each teams. Let's call these teams Team A, Team B, and Team C for now. How do you decide on who works on it? How do you even start? Let's say one team, could be Team A, does a really good job with the tagging feature, but lacked when it came to providing the comments feature. We have another team, Team B, doing an excellent job in creating the upload portion, but lacked when it came to the post feature. And then Team C, it's also creating this feature at the same time as Team A and B. Now, taking a step back, your organization has to change. Ideally, this feature should live outside of the teams A, B, and C, but instead it could live in a new team, X in this case, and subsequent teams like A, B, and C should consume from this new component from Team X. Now, all the important pieces in the overarching design is met. For instance, the look and feel along with your business needs. Our goal is to take advantage of shaping these teams to achieve this. As mentioned earlier, we'll be talking as why Angular meets the needs of enterprises. And there's 3 points I want to go through. The first is provides a specific coding pattern. As I mentioned earlier, Angular is a very opinionated framework. Unlike other component-based frameworks, Angular only has one way to create components, and to a lesser extent, has very little opportunity to deviate between the opinionated ideal way on how to develop said component internally. This sounds like a constraint, like I mentioned earlier, but in reality, in large enterprises, having consistency across teams and code style and tooling is an essential component of reducing barriers to scaling up teams and having a cross-team communication. Second point, additional powerful libraries. Angular has powerful libraries you can utilize to your benefits. And the most popular one of these tools, like I mentioned earlier, NGRX for state management. It utilizes technologies that Angular already depends on, such as RxJS. This means that when your team learns RxJS, they're setting themselves up for success across the entire Angular ecosystem. Also creating the value of training for your teams and providing clear areas to focus on when leveling up your enterprise. Lastly, I love to introduce Angular elements. They're a great piece of this puzzle called consistency, while also providing you the sort of flexibility that enterprise often seek out, but struggle to find with a positive effect. There are multiple opportunities that Angular elements provide, and I'll name them now, which are 2. We'll start with the first one. Creating web components that can be utilized in any web-based application. And I will be expanding on this a little bit more soon. But what this means is that Angular components can be used in a non-Angular based application, preventing the entire organization from having to be married to one framework just to take advantage of reusing the components. And second, a great foundation for a micro-frontend architecture. If you want to switch to the architecture, you either need to use web components or iframes to do so. And Angular provides you an easy way to turn your components into web components. My apologies. Didn't change the slide again. Cool. And now we'll talk a little bit more about Angular elements. So what are they? Well, they follow the web component specifications. And before we proceed, what are web components? I like to think of web components as block of code that encapsulates the core structure of HTML elements, including CSS and JavaScript, and it enables you to use the code anywhere, whether it's a vanilla application or a React app. It also wraps the entire Angular component in a web component, and that's magnificent because you can extract any piece of an application, whether it's a header, a footer, a search bar, or a slice of a page, anything you want, and convert that into a web component ready to be consumed by others. And when we talk about frameworks like Angular, we have to think about their lifecycle hooks, change detection, and event propagation. Angular elements automatically handles all that for you. And in fact, you can further expose these using event output, event propagation, and event propagation. And Angular elements automatically handles all that for you. And in fact, you can further expose these using event output, event propagation, and event propagation. And Angular elements automatically handles all that for you. And in fact, you can further expose these using event output, event propagation, and event propagation. or output emitters to kind of control like the behavior that you want out of the component. And lastly, as mentioned earlier, this is a framework agnostic approach, which means you can drop it anywhere, whether it's a vanilla app, React app, or a Vue app if you want. And it gives you that sense of comfort, which we'll be jumping next. So the benefits of reusability itself. And I know I have spoken a lot about Angular elements over the past few minutes, and that's because it is one of the many tools that helps you achieve this reusability. Now let's jump into some of the benefits of having reusable components or code. An important benefit is having peace of mind. Taking Angular elements as an example, as mentioned just not long ago, is that the component being converted to is framework agnostic. By allowing the consumer to just drop the component with all its business logic right out of the box into any app, regardless of the framework, it's a big plus. Organizations will not feel so tied to a particular framework per se. Just because that one app was built in Angular, it doesn't mean that all subsequent products has to be in Angular. It helps create opportunities for enterprises to explore or leverage other frameworks. If your organization is under a microfront architecture already, taking this microfront architecture concept of breaking front-end monolith into smaller and more manageable pieces, then something like Angular Elements would be a big plus because it already follows that pattern. Being able to follow or being able to promote these practices across your organization, this is a very true thing. So by seeing how easy it is to consume a web component and how much value they bring, it helps other teams to think ahead. Being able to create multiple Angular elements or web components, for example, and consume them across your ecosystem will not only save you time, but additionally give you consistency, which is our next point, providing consistency with your other applications. You want your apps to look and feel the same, especially for the consumers. And having, for example, a shopping cart component working the same exact way in two different applications is what you want to achieve. And lastly, design systems. We have heard about them. They're great. I love them. And they are an integral part of reusability for enterprises. They can be built with Angular elements, which is an excellent tooling given by Angular right out of the box. But design systems do not need to be built with Angular elements. They can be written in any framework of your choice or even any language of your preference. Now, let's go over what really matters. And this is a very simple chart. I wrote some text there, but I'll go through it together. I'll summarize it. But when we look at what's important for enterprises, we ask ourselves, how does value, revenue, cost, and risk kind of link together to give enterprises what they need to succeed? When it comes to value, to me, it means giving it teams consistency to work with, helping unblock development teams to work better, and of course, increasing adoption for customers and developers. We help provide scalable, innovative processes in your enterprises, everything you need to do to scale. Enterprises would want to be able to constantly share their content and knowledge through great communication, which will help you break down internal silos. Having all this come together, it will help you increase your product's adoption, and you want people to get to know your product and use them. The number one goal is to generate value by getting things out of the door or putting it into the market. It helps to get it as fast as you can. Take, for example, a design system. It helps reduce time to develop and increase impact. We want to be standing in a point where enterprises are able to handle more clients with less overhead. And we know that by reducing costs, it's an excellent way to increase revenue. The efficiency gain for not reinventing the wheel gives you a new way to kind of keep innovating as you'll be expending this time to either maybe try a new technology stack, tackling any outstanding tech debts, or even creating a whole new product. By having reusable code, it is a good way to prevent unnecessary work such as copying and rewriting code, which will ultimately save you a lot of time and effort. And when consistency is on the board, and you have code that can be reshared amongst teams, there's less time spent on rewriting components, looking for bugs, cleaning consistent patterns, and etc. As mentioned earlier, by having constraints such as those provided by Angular, you can reduce these risks. Let's not forget, once you create a component, let's just, for example, say a search component, and this is shared amongst other teams to consume. And for the sake of simplicity, we'll assume that this component is fully tested with unit tests, E2E, you name it, 0 bugs, just for this example. Then the consuming team, they don't have to worry about going through an extensive testing process again to ensure that this component actually works perfectly. And it's because it already maybe another team's already using it and it works. So team B, for example, shouldn't, if you slot it in, it should naturally work as well. And that's the concept of it. And you also gain this same look and feel across your apps, which is a cherry on top of the cake. And how sweet is that? And we hit the conclusion side. So let me just quickly recap this whole webinar. I might have gone a little bit fast and talked a lot, but we talked about Angular and its tooling together with how enterprises could benefit from this framework. We went over some basic challenges when it came to scaling. We introduced Angular elements, an excellent way to create reusable components and consume them across other applications within the same ecosystem. And we wrapped up talking about some extended benefits of making your code more reusable in a broader spectrum. There are many challenges that an enterprise can face when trying to scale their apps. We can help you focus on enablements throughout the organization, scale best practices for across your business lines, products, and/or touchpoints, and additionally provide you with strategic or executionary support. These are just some of the key aspects where we could just step in and provide help with. And remember, reusability is brings immense value to enterprise in the long run, as you will not only be saving time from development, but you'll be able to push your products or feature at a faster rate to your customer, making them a lot happier. And we hit the Q&A section. If there are any questions, you can feel free to post them. I'll have someone looking into the comments, if any. So I went maybe a bit too fast for everyone, and that was a lot of content. Ooh. Okay, I got something. Hi, Freddie. Can you explain how design system help orgs to save money? Right. Design system. I mentioned that quite a lot. And just to give you a quick response, because I can go on for days. I love design systems, but design system will not only help you save money, but also earn revenue. We briefly talked about how they were a great way to promote reusability and help set constraints across your applications. Echoing what I mentioned a little bit earlier, they can greatly help you reduce your development time, allowing you to promote your product faster to the public. And as we know, saving time from development, you can save those hours and spend them innovating another part of your application or enterprise. And we actually have a lot of content about design systems in our website. And I believe Rebecca will, or myself will post those links shortly so you can read more about design systems and how we can help you as well. Cool. Another question. Are there any risks and challenges you see from using design system or web components? Good question. Now, one of the main risks for this would be the need of a team to maintain such. As mentioned earlier, team structure is very important. When thinking of design system or web components, you must commit to this. And by commit, I'm referring to restructuring your teams or making any necessary changes accordingly. Otherwise, you might hit like an in-between phase where it would cost you a lot of money. By now, we know that investing and creating a design system or a collection of web components per se at the very beginning will reap a lot of rewards in the future. But what happens when it's backwards? When this happens, we're met with this need of restructuring code, of refactoring in order to kind of retrofit this technology, which we know it would cost a lot of money and time. And that's why I think that's one of the main risks. It all depends. Next question. Does this integrate with Jira? Ooh. Integrate with Jira, what does it mean? The Angular components, or are you talking about reusability? Would you, let's see, would you mind, is there any specific integration you're trying to look for with Jira? Like I said, the concept of reusability, the concept of Angular elements, the concept of design systems. Right. So in terms of reusability, you mean? What, from experience, the way we create tickets is we try to think ahead and kind of not try to reinvent the wheel, but also help the enterprise side kind of understand and gather all the business needs, whether this is a one use case or is it something that needs to be needs something to be reused in a broader ecosystem. Tracking Angular codes via stories. That's a good question. It should be something that is achievable, but something that we haven't experienced. The way we done it is kind of understanding the whole scope of the. So this takes a lot of investigation mainly because you want to understand whether the feature being built is something of a one-time use or more of a broader scale. And from that, we narrow down the decision, but we ultimately try to build those into kind of like a shareable type of library as much as we can, because there's always a need to reuse them, especially you can't predict how things are going to scale later on. And maybe through Jira, you can track these type of improvements if by any means, if that makes sense. Hopefully I get to touch a little bit on the answer and answer a bit of your question. If not, like I said, you can feel free to reach out to marketing@Rangle.io and we'll get your answers for sure. What's the best practice when it comes to security? Is the web app composing consuming the Angular responsible for authentication authorization, or should the individual elements be standalone? Good question. So I don't know if you heard, I'm going to repeat it. I'm sorry, I read it through my mind. What's the best practice when it comes to security? Is the web app composing / consuming the Angular element responsible for authentication / authorization, or should the individual elements be standalone? Excellent question. So we want to keep the component as dumb as possible. So the authorization or any business heavy logic, it should reside more into the app level, like the parent level. Because if you think about it this way, app A might have different requirements than app B. But if to a certain extent they have similarity, then you can maybe extract it to a service, or you can ask yourself, is this something that it's livable in a component? But you also have to think about adding, when you add things to the component, you don't want to over architect that feature, because then when you want to scale or improve or even add something to it, it becomes very hard. So the best practice and the format that worked best for us is keeping things as dumb as possible. And then anything outstanding like business logic, we can extract it out and have the parent component handle that. Just because we've experienced time where multiple apps are different. I hope that answered your question. Okay, another question. With design systems, do you have any recommendation on balancing how strong the opinion should be versus flexibility of the system? Ooh, this is an excellent question. So, design systems. I want to first define what I think of the design systems. And I think of them as a collection of usable components guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications, okay? So the way I think about design system is the components, they shouldn't be too strict. They should be as dumb, as tight and clean as possible, because you want to use them to assemble other type of applications as well. So if you tie in something more like business heavy for one application, then maybe application B and C needs to extract them or needs to find a way around that certain business logic. Now, in terms of balancing how strong the opinion should be versus the flexibility of the system, it changes from, I'll say, it depends on the team and the company and the business needs, because there are times that maybe a more robust element or component should be part of the design system, whereas in most of the cases, it might be just a light composition, right? Have very atomic elements, and you just compose them to form that template per se. But yeah, we definitely have a lot of information in our website, which we will send, and you should be able to go through a lot of those content. And it's a really good question. I think we've encountered both scenario where sometimes we have to just go with what works best for the team, where it might not be as atomic, but sometimes, well, not as atomic, not as flexible, of course. And sometimes we've had cases where we have exposed it to be so simple that it became so flexible that could even overcome the most complex business needs, like kind of cover them. Okay, just going through. Right, so last question to wrap up. Okay. I'll take some more questions. I'll take a few more, maybe. Okay, let's see. Any recommendation measuring design system adoption? Example, how many apps are using it and what version are being used? Cool. So maybe, yeah, let me go with this. So design system adoption, I'm going to echo what I said. We definitely have information about this as well written down. So I won't go too in depth. So we'll send the links as well for you to read about our experiences with this. But there's definitely tooling where you can run and check for certain components being used. So in one of our enterprise clients, we do have a small script that we run through the code base and kind of ensure how many components were consumed. And we get this very generic, but also deep stats where you can tell kind of how much is the consumer and trying to adopt the design system. And of course, what version being used, you would tie that to the same script. I believe we do have some more information about that in our website, so you might read it. I don't recall the tooling names, but yeah, that's something you could do and kind of adapt to any situations you need. Yeah, this is something we've done for sure a lot of times, and this is something that a lot of enterprises like to know because they like to know how much value a design system could bring. And yeah, such a good question, and it takes practice adoption. And okay, I'll take the last two questions and we should be good to go because I do want to give time back. Next question, does the framework work well while deploying and scaling with Kubernetes clusters? It does. It's when setting up your CI/CD pipeline, it gives you the opportunity to kind of ship your bundle differently. So you have control over it. At the end of the day, you get those components as individual bundles per se, and you can just host them through your clusters per se and use that instead. We found that it worked well for one of our enterprise clients as well. So that's why we saw a lot of value talking about when it came to Angular, or even like features like Angular elements that were very reusable as well as flexible for them. And last one, or last two, let me see. We'll wrap it up now. What would be the benefit of Angular elements in regards to deployment? Angular elements generate a JS file that needs to be added to the main project, and that will require a new build anyways in case of change. Right. So it is, when you think about it, it is kind of tedious. Like, oh, let me just change 2 lines of code, and now I have to regenerate the whole file and deploy it. But these are the things that when you build from the very ground up from scratch, it's like I mentioned before, you have all these unit tested, you have all this hashed out, all the business needs added. It's rarely that it changes, but when it does, it's something that we've seen that doesn't change that often. So kind of like the pros outweighs the cons. And in this case, the cons would be like, I guess, the nonsense of recompiling to get the newest thing and have to deploy it. But yeah, from experience, I think the pros kind of outweighs the cons in this case. So we found that, yeah, building the right thing at the very beginning, it became very convenient for us to move forward with. But we also had times where we retrofitted this technology into something that was very mature. So we tried extracting pieces of code from one of our enterprise clients and kind of make it an Angular element. And that caused a lot of kind of issues because it had a lot of dependency built into it. So I can see that being a big pain for sure. But after working through that, it became so good because we never touched it again. And they were so happy with it and still being used throughout the whole ecosystem. And that's kind of like our way to make up for it. Like that's a big pro. Okay, let's see. And last question for today. Thank you all for asking questions as well. In terms of differentiating Angular elements, sorry for that, versus a standard Angular component, shouldn't elements / web components be smart / the standalone, i.e. integration with web API, authentication, etc. Otherwise, we can just get away with using a component. Right. So the concept of Angular elements is more so when you are an enterprise and you have a very mature app already. But let's say you're in the blinks of creating a second product and you're kind of evaluating, your tech team is evaluating what technology to pick. When you have something like Angular elements compiled to a web component, it gives them more a sense of security, like a peace of mind where they can be like, okay, let's just try React because of all these new libraries you want to try, for example, or let's try React just because they have this one library that we really need for this feature. So you don't have to be married to that idea of, oh, we just needed to do it in Angular now again. And it's nice because it also gives you that new way of, experimenting with other technologies, and maybe you might find some things that work well. That's why we think Angular Elements is a very positive thing, and we tried it and it was amazing. But yes, elements and web components, we should be, it's definitely not going to be Angular elements or complex components that you're porting over are going to be a lot smarter than, let's say, a simple component from the design system, because that's going to just be as atomic as it can. And all you needed to do is to compose it. But that doesn't stop you from keep extracting or breaking down the component you're trying to convert into a web component through Angular elements. You can extract it to a level that it's very atomic. But yeah, it all depends on your needs, I guess. But we've seen it all, and it's amazing. I would totally recommend to look more into it. And yeah, hopefully I've answered all those questions well. If not, like I said, we have a lot of content in our website, and please do reach out to marketing@Rangle.io if you have any further questions. And if you want to talk more about specific questions today that you couldn't find in our website or I couldn't answer well, still ask them and we'll get back to you and I'll try to answer them way better. With that being said, thank you so much to everyone that have attended. Thank you so much for everyone that asked these amazing questions.